Well, good evening. Thank you so much. I apologize, Ms. Christine. Like I said, I was having technical difficulties on my end and I was over here stressing everyone. So it looks like we're all ready to go. I'm hoping everybody can hear me. Please put in the chat if you can't for any reason, okay? If you're not able to hear me. My name is Aretha Higgins and I'm the Senior Housing Counselor at Dallas Habitat. And I apologize, but again, it happens.
It does.
Yes, but we appreciate you all joining us this evening for this very important topic, dynamics of domestic violence. And we have Ms. Christine Ruddle here, and she's gonna give us lots of information and just teach us a little bit about this and what we need to do, how we can protect others, our loved ones, ourselves, and others in the community. And it's just, again, just a very important topic, and so glad that you all have tuned in. And I'm going to turn it over to Miss Christine so she can go ahead and get started.
All right. Well, thank you. Again, my name's Christine Ruddle. I'm a client advocate with Genesis Women's Shelter and Support in Dallas. We are a domestic violence agency. We have a emergency shelter, a transitional housing program. We have outreach services, which offers counseling and advocacy to women and children who may still be in an abusive relationship, but they might also have left years ago, but are still feeling the effects of it. And then soon we will be opening a new facility in South Dallas on Lancaster that will serve that area. And then what we're really known for, I think, when people say Genesis, is our thrift store. So we have a thrift store in the Oak Lawn area that raises funds. It usually raises a little bit over $2 million a year to support the services that we provide at no cost to our clients. So I've been with Genesis for 10 years now. I love it. I want to keep doing it for a long time. So the reason for tonight's webinar is to learn more about domestic violence and how that affects really all of us, but also you may know someone who's in a situation like that, and maybe they don't know that's what they're living with. So let's learn about it together. So the first thing we're going to do is take a quiz, and there's 10 questions, and I would like for you to put your answers in the chat box if you would, and they are true or false questions. So they're not hard, and it doesn't really matter if you get it right or wrong. It's just a way to get us thinking, okay? So the first question, if this will work anyway, and it's not, of course. Oh, there we go. True or false? Domestic violence is a learned behavior and is rarely caused by mental illness. So what do you think? Is that true or false? And I'll give you a minute to put your answers in. Which hopefully, Aretha, you can see.
Yes, Ms. Christine, I can certainly see it. And I want our participants to be sure to put their answers in the chat box. We want lots of participation this evening.
Okay, any responses?
We have a false.
Okay, and that would be correct. It is false. So that first part of the question, domestic violence is a learned behavior, is true. But the second part is rarely caused by mental illness is false. So it makes the whole thing false. It is not ever caused by mental illness. It doesn't mean that an abuser might have a mental illness, but it's not the reason they're abusing. All right. The next one, the term domestic violence is only used when the victim has physical injuries such as bruises, cuts, and broken bones. I imagine everyone will get this, but is that what domestic violence means? It's only used if there's physical abuse.
All right, let's see those answers in the chat box.
Okay, this one is false as well. I used to say when I first started doing this 10 years ago, up until recently, that there are 4 types of abuse. And one of them, of course, is physical abuse. But there's verbal abuse, emotional, psychological abuse, physical abuse, and then sexual abuse. But we're seeing some increase in different types of abuses. So now I include financial abuse and also technology abuse, or using technology as a means of being abusive. Okay, alcohol and other drugs cause domestic violence. True or false? Okay, we have a true, and this one is false. So again, it's similar to mental illness. In over 80, I believe it's 80% of cases that are reported, domestic violence cases that are reported to the police, alcohol or other drugs might be a part of it. But again, it's not the reason that the abuse is taking place. Domestic violence does not only occur in low income, minority, or dysfunctional families. True or false? Sounds like a double negative, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it is true. So domestic violence is no respecter of persons, so it can happen to anyone. I've worked with women with a PhD or an MD. I've worked with clients who have not received their GED yet, but it can happen to anybody. It is very easy for women to leave abusive relationships. True or false?
Okay, type your answers in the chat box. I know it's been a long day. All right, Ms. Martha says false.
Okay, it is false. And thank you, Martha. I'm glad that you know that. We know that it's 75% higher risk for women when they leave an abusive relationship. And so they're at more risk to be seriously injured or killed. So no, it is not easy to leave a relationship. In over 95% of domestic violence assaults, the man is the perpetrator and the woman is the victim. True or false?
What do y'all think?
Okay, and it is true. Now we have to keep in mind that these are reported cases of domestic violence, and men can be and are victims of domestic violence. They don't tend to report or go to the hospital as often as women do. We also know that same-sex relationships, that it could be that the man is a victim in that situation as well. I work for Genesis, and we only work with women or those who identify as female. So when I'm doing this presentation, I will be saying female or woman is the victim, but keep in mind that it could be a man or it could be transgender, something other than female. But because of what we work with, that is how I do the presentation. So next, people who batter or who are abusive are often good parents. True or false?
Okay, anyone?
Okay, it is false, Martha. However, I do want to tell you that in working with women with children, that many times, especially when we're doing a domestic violence education group or a parenting group, they will say, oh, he's a good dad. He may hurt me, but he really takes good care of the children. But the truth is, anyone who is abusing mom is not being a good parent. So that one is false. And then domestic violence is the leading cause of injury to women in the United States. True or false?
Okay, I may have to start calling on people. We have a true.
Yeah. Martha's going to get a prize at the end. I don't know if that's possible.
Thank you, Miss Martha.
So domestic violence is the leading cause of physical injury to women in the United States. All right, children who grow up in violent homes, hate violence, most likely will not grow up to be perpetrators or victims of domestic violence. True or false? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and answer this one. It is false. We know that boys who grow up in a home where there is abuse, 40% will grow up to become abusers themselves. Now, I try to remember that 60% don't, but 40% are influenced in such a way that they too grow up to become abusers. 50% of females will grow up to become victims of domestic violence. And what we hear many times from those who have grown up in a home where there was violence say is that I thought it was love, because that's what they were told and what they were taught. Last but not least, domestic violence is rare. Doesn't happen very often. True or false?
All right, come on. Okay, we have a false.
Okay, it is false, and we're going to learn why it is false. So what is domestic violence? What is it really? So it's when one person in an intimate partner relationship exercises power and control over the other partner through a pattern of intentional behaviors. Now, when you say domestic violence, it actually can cover family violence. So what I'm talking about is a intimate partner violence. And so it's with a couple. Maybe they're married, maybe they're not. Maybe they live together, maybe they don't, but they're an intimate partner relationship. And so one partner is going to exercise power and control over the other through a pattern of intentional behaviors. And then domestic violence, as it continues, becomes a systematic diminishment of a woman in her home or in the place where she resides. So the reason why it's really important and why we know that it doesn't, that it isn't rare, it does happen, is that 1 in 4 women in the US will know domestic violence during her lifetime. And it says 1 in 3 worldwide. Well, in Texas, where we know that Texans like to do everything bigger and better, it is also 1 in 3 women in the in Texas who will experience or are experiencing domestic violence. 1 in 3 teenage girls will be physically exhausted by a boyfriend, physically assaulted by a boyfriend. They're usually, we consider teenage girls between the ages of 14 to 25 and to 24. And if I asked you why we would consider it up to that age, it's because the brain fully develops at the age of 25. And then domestic violence is the leading cause of entry between the ages of 15 to 44, more than car accidents, more than muggings, and rapes combined. Sometimes I think my screen is freezing up too. Okay, here we go. So I want to talk a little bit about those types of violence. So here they are. The verbal is usually where it begins and then moves into emotional, physical, financial, technology, and sexual. So let's start with verbal emotional abuse because that is where it usually begins. So under verbal emotional abuse, if we were in person, I would be asking you to tell me these. But since we're on a webinar, I'm just going to share this screen with you. I do want to highlight some of them. So under emotional, verbal and emotional abuse, it usually starts with the criticism, the put downs, the name calling. It might be being cussed out or being yelled at or raged at. And raging is something that usually takes place in the middle of the night. It might be, you might be sound asleep, it's 1 o'clock in the morning, and the abuser comes in and wakes her up and starts yelling at her and raging about something that might have happened earlier in the day, or maybe in the week, or maybe she might not even know what he's talking about. But he'll do that, wake her up, keep it going from 5 minutes, sometimes up to an hour, and then stop and allow her to go back to sleep. It might happen again a few hours later that same night. But then the next night, do you think she's going to go to bed? No, she's going to be nervous about it. She's going to be expecting it to happen again, and it doesn't happen. And so the next night, she might be nervous still and be expecting it to happen, but she's not quite as nervous as she was the night before, and then nothing happens. So next few nights, nothing happens. So then she feels pretty good about it, and then it'll happen again. And so it's unexpected. You never know when it's going to happen. So you start you're walking on eggshells. Another one, and all of these things, using the court system to continue abuse, intimidation, threats, saying you'll kill yourself if you leave me, I'll kill you or the children, I'll have you deported. All these things are ways to keep control. But isolation. So isolation, what do you think of when you think about isolation? Do you think about someone maybe being locked in a room or not being allowed to go somewhere? Today, isolation can be done by taking a cell phone away or monitoring that cell phone and not allowing them to speak to anyone, cutting off communication with loved ones, with friends, with family. At Genesis, we've seen that type of isolation. We've also seen where they have been locked in a room or in a closet. I even had one young woman who was locked in a box for over a week. So isolation can be extreme. And we know with our counseling that many times it'll take a lot longer to heal from emotional abuse than it does to heal from most physical injury. Gaslighting here. Has anyone heard of the movie Gaslight? If you haven't, I encourage you to watch it. It's a film from the 1940s where the couple, the husband is trying to make his wife feel like she's crazy so he can get her sent to an asylum so that he can take control of her money and find some jewelry, I think, that he stole and is hidden in the house somewhere. But he does all kinds of things to make her think that she's crazy. And that's happens in domestic violence, a lot of different ways. And something that she's now is technology to make her feel like she's crazy. So those are the types of things. So I started to put this picture in about every other slide, just so you would get the hint. But here have you heard of Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde? So an abuser can look like, I think Dr. Jekyll is the good one and Mr. Hyde was the evil one. So this is Mr. Hyde up here and Dr. Jekyll down here. And so Dr. Jekyll was the good guy and was compassionate and kind and loved people. But then when he drank the potion, he would then become the scary guy who would go out and murder someone. Well, abusers tend to put on the Dr. Jekyll personality and image when they are in the public eye, or when they're in a situation where they want people to know that they're a good person and they do good things, and they can never be accused of doing something evil. And yet, in where the closed doors are closed or no one's watching, they're the other way around. Now, physical abuse is what most people are aware of when they talk about domestic violence, and it does cover all of those kind of things that you think about. But some of them that maybe you're not aware of that are considered physical abuse are things when you don't even touch the other person. So yes, slapping, pushing, shoving, kicking, pulling hair, biting, pinching, spitting, all of these are actually touching the person. But there's sometimes, like when you punch a wall and you punch the wall next to the person's head, you didn't touch them, but you certainly got a message across that says, I can hurt you, I will hurt you, and instill fear in them. Abandoning someone in an unsafe place. This happens, and teenagers tend to use cars to scare and intimidate their partner. We've had clients who have been left on the side of the interstate, and I don't know about you, but when I'm driving 70 and 75 on Interstate 35, I don't want to see someone left on the side of the road, especially with children. That's terrifying. And this happens, and they drive off and leave them there. One that we continue to learn about, and it's really, to me, frightening, is strangulation. So there's a difference between choking and strangulation. And when you ask someone, have you ever been strangled? The response is, if they have been, the response is almost always, well, I've been choked. Well, there is a difference between the two. So choking is when something is stuck in the throat and you can't breathe. And yes, you could die that way. It's not usually what an abuser will do, but it does happen. Strangulation is when pressure is put on the outside of the throat. And the purpose of that, it cuts off the oxygen, but it also cuts off the blood supply, which causes the organs to start shutting down. So if you have a can of Dr. Pepper or Coke in your hand and you pull that tab off, that's all the amount of pressure that it takes to kill someone when you're strangling them. And the amount of time it takes is 6 to 10 seconds. So it doesn't take very long. It doesn't take very much pressure. What happens in domestic violence is that strangulation is used to intimidate and to create fear. So usually the way it happens is it goes almost to the point of losing consciousness, and maybe even losing consciousness, but not to the point of death. And so the point is to scare them and to frighten them. And so it happens more than once. It might happen once a week. It might happen once a month. It might happen every day. It might happen in connection with sexual activities. And so what happens is, over time, as it continues, is that it can cause brain damage. It can cause damage to the vocal cords and to the throat, even to internal organs. So it's very, very serious. And it really is important to get help if that is something that is happening or has happened in the past. If you do have any questions, please put those in the chat or the Q&A. And Aretha, it's okay to stop me if there are questions, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Then sexual abuse. So when I ask the question, what do you think about when you hear the term sexual abuse? most people think of rape or forced sex. So rape can happen in a committed relationship, in a marriage. So when sex is forced upon someone and they say, no, I don't want this, and the person continues, then that is rape. And that does happen in domestic violence. It's very hard for victims of domestic violence to recognize that for what it is. But there's other forms of sexual abuse. And so it might be forcing someone to watch pornography when they don't want to. It might be forcing them to perform sexual acts when of a type that they don't want to participate in. And something that I've seen increase over time is that it might have started out as what the woman thought was a significant other in a loving relationship, and it will progress into a situation where she sees herself as a prostitute. And so we're also seeing more situations where it's led to sex trafficking. So all of that can be a part of domestic violence. And then there's financial abuse. Now this says between 94 and 99% of domestic violence survivors have also experienced economic abuse. I'm waiting to meet that 1% who didn't, because it seems to me that every single client we has experienced economic abuse in some form. So it might be preventing her from getting her job or causing her to lose a job over and over again. And in domestic violence, it doesn't matter if she works, he's going to control the money. He might give her an allowance and she has to use that allowance for exactly what he told her to use it for and account for all of that. What we've seen an increase in is running her credit, using her credit cards, taking out loans or credit cards in her name without her knowledge, all of which, let me point out, is a crime. Making her commit crimes involving fake checks or robbery. And I have had clients who have criminal backgrounds because of those very things. Misreporting income, and I don't know about how many of you received I guess everybody receives some of the government money that came because of COVID. And so many of our clients never saw that because the abuser took that money, and even though he might not have even been a part of her life anymore, he managed to get that money. Technology abuse. Has everybody got your cell phone? I want you to look at your cell phone and think about how many text messages you receive if you have a significant other, if you have a best friend or children. How many, I'd like you to put this in chat. How many text messages would you say that you get a day?
Okay, let's see that come through the chat. How many text messages do you think you receive in a day? We got 30.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Are they all from one person? So, okay, so technology abuse would be getting anywhere from 100, 200, 300 text messages, maybe 50 text messages in an hour. So it's an excessive amount of text messages or emails to her. And of course, they would be harassing and threatening and wanting to know, where are you and what are you doing, and that kind of thing. So you may have heard about using spyware on a phone. And when I first started doing this 10 years ago, to put spyware on a phone, you had to pay a whole lot of money. And then you had to have the person's phone in your hand to put the spyware on it for some amount of time. Well, today, because of the advances in technology, you don't have to have the phone in your hand at all. You can send spyware through a text message or through a phone number. There's different ways to do that, and without them ever knowing that it was put on that phone. And so, how would somebody know if that's on your phone? Well, the only way to know, it's really hard to find and it's kind of hard to get rid of. But if your phone has been tampered with and there's spyware on it, then whoever the one that put it on there, they're going to know what you're doing. They're going to know who you're talking to. They're going to know what you're saying. And they're probably going to know what location you're at. And so the only way to get that off of the phone is to set it back to default setting, and not put anything back on it. You can't take that SIM card and put it back in because you're probably reloading that spyware. So it's best to take it to a service provider, get their help to reset it, and keep that from happening. Social media. I know Facebook is no longer Facebook. It's called something else. Meta, is that it? But you have to think about social media with such things as Instagram. And I'm sure there's so many more that I don't know what they are. But whatever they are, if they do have location settings on them, then you need to check those to turn those off. With Facebook and Meta, and maybe some of the others where you tag people, you got to be really careful of that if an abuser is stalking you and harassing you. I had a client one time who, her ex was very angry with her because he did get put in jail, and he was trying to find her all the time. And she moved from Dallas to another city. She was working in a really nice restaurant that hosted musical events. And so her supervisor knew her story and knew not to put her picture out there or do anything, but there was someone in charge of the media for the restaurant who didn't know that. And so he had posted some pictures from an event and he tagged her in it. And the very next day, the abuser showed up in the parking lot of that restaurant and had found her. So you have to be really careful about a lot of things like that. But they can use technology now to post photos, intimate photos that you don't want out there. And all of those require a lot of work to get them off of the internet out there. Okay, so how does all this get started? Do you think that you meet some guy and he slaps you around and oh my, you just love him, so you're going to marry him? No. It starts what I like to call the manipulative kindness or honeymoon phase. So it begins when you meet someone and they sweep you off your feet and they treat you like a princess and do all kinds of things to make you feel really good. The red flag, there's more than two probably, but the two that come to mind, number one is jealousy. So jealousy, sometimes people say, oh, that's love. He must really love me. He's so jealous. Well, jealousy is not love. It is a controlling behavior. And so when that's a red flag. Another red flag is a push for a quick commitment. So when they first meet, and he's so charming and so wonderful, he's going to push for a quick commitment. And I used to joke about, well, you met him on Monday and you're living together on Friday, or you got married on Friday. And that's really quick, but that's how quick it can happen. But it might take a long time. But during that time, there's going to be that push for a commitment. Now, that's stage one of the cycle of violence. So stage two is after there's a commitment. And after there's a commitment, then it totally changes. And he might have gone from being attentive and wanting to do really nice things to all of a sudden he's angry or he's moody and you just don't know what's going on, and you ask and they don't answer. So the victim generally thinks, oh, I'm doing something wrong. I've got to figure this out. And they try to fix it. but you get punished for making mistakes. Well, there's only one person who can end the tension building phase, and that is the abuser. And that's what happens when there's the way the abuser ends the tension building phase is this violent episode. So the violent episode could be physical, sexual, it could be emotional or verbally abusive, flying into a rage, hitting, slapping, strangulation, using weapons. But something happens and that violent explosion happens. Well, from there, it goes back to stage one. The first time that happens, the abuser generally knows they went too far when she either cries or gets angry. Maybe she leaves and goes home to her family or to a friend's house. So he knows he went too far. So what he's going to do, because he doesn't want her to leave, then he will go back to being kind and to making her feel special and to saying he's sorry, it won't ever happen again. Or he might say, I'll go to counseling with you, just don't leave me. And so the honeymoon phase is the most confusing part of the cycle of violence because it gives hope. It helps you to think, well, maybe he's going to change. Oh, this is who he really is. He's not like that. But the entire time those kind, wonderful things are happening, the point of it is to keep her in that relationship. So that's why it's called manipulative kindness. So in domestic violence, the violence doesn't just stop, it continues, and that cycle continues. If you stay in it long enough, then the violence will escalate. It doesn't diminish. So it might start down here with yelling, using profanity, move on up to where you're being stalked, threats to take the children away, threats of murder, and all the way up here to the top where and once someone is experiencing strangulation, they're just a step away of being murdered, and that's the truth. And it's just heartbreaking. So I used to say, why does she stay in that relationship? Because that is what the public has been taught to ask. Whenever you see a public display of domestic violence between a couple, the question people usually ask is, well, why did she stay with him? Why did she marry him? Why doesn't she just leave? But instead of saying that, I want you to think about what are the barriers to leaving a relationship. So I'm going to show you this. So here's our victim here with the children. And these are all the things. And I'm going to leave it up here for a moment. So let's say that she calls 911 and makes a report. The squad comes and investigates. Well, if there's an arrest, there's going to be an arrest report. He might go to jail, arraignment hearing, no contact order, or it could go all the way over here to being on protection. Child Protective Services may get involved. I mean, these are all the things that can happen when she leaves the abusive relationship. So here are some of the barriers to leaving. And we hear these quite often. So loving him. So you don't stop loving a person because they hurt you. Even when they hurt you for over a long period of time, you don't necessarily stop loving. So there's always, and that goes with the hope that they could change, that the person you knew them for in the beginning, that it could go back to that. But at the same time, there's just so many things, pressure from family or friends. Here's the biggest one, probably lack of resources and finances, mistrust in police and legal systems. Today, I spent 5 different 20-minute sessions with a client who needed to make a police report because she was assaulted when she left the shelter today She was at a bus stop in another side of town, and the abuser drove by and saw her. He got out, he was yelling at her, he strangled her in public. And the only reason he let go is because other cars were stopping and honking and yelling things out. So she was able to get away, but she was very hesitant to make a police report because she felt like it would go against her, because that has happened to her in the past. So that mistrust in police and the legal system. But with a lot of help today, she did make that police report, and there is a warrant out for his arrest now, which is only going to make him angry and is going to put her in a little bit more danger. So having to safety plan. But there's so many barriers to leaving. So the question really is, why does he do that? And like I said, if it's switched, if it's the woman is the perpetrator, then we would be saying, why does she do that? So some of the myths surrounding why does he do that are that it's caused by drugs or alcohol use or abuse, which, like I said, it might be involved in a situation, but it's not the reason they're doing it. Same for mental health. I even had a coworker saying the other day, and a client, that, well, they must all have mental health issues. Well, no, they don't, not any more than the general public. And according to the statistics, about 10% of the population. So no, the majority of them do not have mental health issues. Anger management. So you see a lot of anger in domestic violence, but it's not about anger management. And so if you send them to anger management, it doesn't change their abusive behavior. Maybe he saw his dad was abusive with his mother, low self-esteem, stress. She deserved it. Ever heard that one? She was asking for it. And I'm sure there are others. Okay, but why does he really do that? Mainly because he can. So it's about power and control. He feels entitled. He twists things into their own opposites. He disrespects his partner, considers himself superior. He confuses love and abuse. He is manipulative. He feels justified, and he is possessive. So I want you to think about it. You don't have to answer this, but I want you to think about, where does someone learn about, because we said it was a learned behavior, that he's entitled, that he has a right to be in control and have this power over another person. So it could be from living at home with it and seeing it in action. It could be from the media and the things that we see in movies. And I challenge you to listen to music and pay attention to the lyrics and see, is that about domestic violence? I tried 20 minutes of country. I love country music. And I was listening to about 20 minutes worth in the car one day when I was driving. I was like, wait a minute, that's about power and control over another person. That's abuse. So it's not just one genre of music. It could be many different ones. It might be bullying, something that happens a lot in our schools, and we're hearing more about it, but that could also teach that kind of behavior. So what if you know someone who is in a relationship like that? How do you help a survivor? So first of all, it's really important to believe her. So one of the things that you might think about or have heard is when a survivor or a victim tells you their story about, oh, he's treating me really bad, he slapped me, he hit me, but it seems like she's told you that story 20 times, 30 times, multiple times. Well, the reality is she needs to tell that story, and she needs for you to believe her. And she needs to know that what's happening is not good, and that she's in danger. So saying, I'm so glad you feel comfortable talking to me about this. What's happening in your relation is not okay. How can I support you? So why does she need to tell that story? Because she doesn't know how bad it is. And the more she tells the story, she's hoping that someone will help her know that it's not okay and that there is help out there. So if you have someone in your life who is telling you those kind of stories, listen to her without judging her. You're not in her shoes, but let her know that you care and that there are resources out there to help her. Don't blame her. And in fact, you can tell her it's not your fault. Everybody deserves to be safe in their relationship. Understand that survival is the priority. So let go of your expectations of how a survivor should behave, but let her know that surviving, being safe is her priority. Um, Help her to begin to think about safety planning. So it's really important, I think, not to put yourself in danger when there is an abusive relationship and you don't want to be targeted either. So I think this is where it's important to know there's help out there for safety planning and that there are people that you can talk to. We have a hotline, there's a national hotline. We are the first agency in the state of Texas to have a text line for victims to text us rather than call us, because many times that's a much safer way to do it. Um, so knowing that there are resources out there and knowing that you can do that. And then continue to provide support and just be there for that person. And by being there, I don't mean you have to be in their life every single day, just letting them know that you are there for them and that you'll answer that phone or respond to a text, and that you'll help them find a place of safety. So what is a safety plan? So one thing you can help with, if they're still with the abuser, is to keep their important documents for them. So what is an important document? It's your driver's license or a Texas ID. It's birth certificates, it's social security cards, school records, if there's children, medical records. And these are and if you're an immigrant, it might be your green card or your visa, passports. And so these are the documents that abusers tend to hide or destroy. So if it's possible to get those into a safe place, that is huge. Thinking about physical safety, victims of abuse they are the experts. They do know their abuser the best. And so figuring out inside the home and outside the home, what are safe places to be? Where are safe places to go? There are now there's apps to put on your phone where if you're in trouble, you can hit one button and it will send an alert to a safe person so that they know you're in trouble, can know where you are and can help in that way. And so here are the services that we provide at Genesis. We have a 24-hour hotline, the emergency shelter, transitional housing. We also work with Metro Dallas Homeless Alliance to find housing for the homeless. And anytime you're in an emergency shelter, you are homeless. So we've been working with them to get our clients matched with housing. We have an outreach center. We provide trauma therapy, play therapy, and teen counseling. We do have an on-site school at our shelters because we did discover that it wasn't safe for children necessarily to keep going to the schools they were going to, because the abuser would know where that was and where to go get them. Advocacy, which is what I do, is basically connecting the victims with resources that they need to rebuild their lives. Parenting classes, we do classes for CPS. And then we do have a legal team now to help with legal family law type of cases. So that's the end of it. I want to thank you all, but if there's any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer those.
Thank you so much, Ms. Christine, for that wonderful presentation. And I didn't see any questions in the chat, but I had a question for you, and I wanted you to kind of elaborate on it, just on your many years of experience. I wanted to know, do abusers change? How often have you seen that?
Okay, well, I don't know that I have seen it personally in the clients that we work with, but I think that's a very good question. I think it's a legitimate question. So it's a learned behavior. So yes, it could be unlearned, but that is not easy. So Lundy Bancroft is a counselor or someone who has worked with abusers for over 30 years now. Mm-hmm. He's written a book, Why Does He Do That? And it's excellent. But he says, and he does run groups for offenders, we will say, or abusers. And they usually are court ordered to those type of groups. They're called batterer intervention programs, better known as BIP. And a lot of abusers are court ordered to go to that. But it's kind of like substance abuse recovery programs. A lot of those are court ordered as well. And it doesn't matter, because people, whether they're court ordered or they go voluntarily, have the same chance of recovery. So yes, they can change that behavior. He says it takes about 18 months to 2 years of going to therapy counseling at least once a week and to 2 group sessions a week for that 18 months to 2 years to change behavior. So it's hard work, and you really have to have a desire to change and a commitment to do the work. So that's probably why we don't see it too often. We are not an agency that provides that BIP program, but there are domestic violence agencies in Dallas that do that work, so, which I'm glad, because I do think that we should have that tool for them.
Yes, definitely.
So yeah.
Thank you so much. And also, I noticed, I was watching the news, and they were reporting that due to the pandemic, domestic violence cases were on the rise. Right. How does the economy, how does that play a role in domestic abuse?
Well, the pandemic, I think, contributed to it because of the isolation, where, especially in the beginning, where you couldn't leave the home at all to go out. And that can, right there, can just, tension builds. And as the tension builds, there's going to be an outlet for that. And unfortunately, and I don't know if you've heard of the Texas Council on Family Violence, but they do a count every year of how many victims there are murdered by their significant other. And so there was a pretty significant rise in that number in 2020. We don't get the numbers for the current year, we get them for the previous year. So the 2020 numbers did go up from the year before, which I think is an indication of that as well. So yes, anytime there's a loss of a job or an increase of stress of any kind, then that does increase the amount of domestic violence. Okay. So yeah.
Thank you.
And then the resources, for example, our shelter, I consider us, I guess I'm going to say we're the medium-sized emergency shelter for domestic violence. Salvation Army has a domestic violence shelter that has 7 rooms. We have 14. Family Place has triple that number. So they're large. But when the pandemic hit, we had been able to put single women without children to share a room, so we could take in more victims. And once the pandemic hit, we could not do that anymore. So we can only put one person in a room
Mhm.
or a mom with children for safety, for social distancing and safety. So that means that resource of needing emergency shelter is smaller than
Right.
what it was. So that's been an impact as well. So,
Wow. I can only imagine.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the increase in the number of death or murders, I want to say it was 68% were by guns.
Mm.
Yeah, so I think we've seen, I mean, I just feel like when I get news alerts on the weekends, it's all
Mhm.
about traffic accidents and shootings and all that. And I just feel like there's been an increase with the
Yeah.
pandemic. So
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you so much for answering that. And
Mhm.
we had a question to come through the chat, and it's basically they want to know it says, how can we help family, friends, or stranger that's a friend, somebody, what's the best way for us to help someone that we know that's in a situation?
Well, I'm going to start with the stranger because, for example, when that was happening today to my client, when he stopped his car and got out and was attacking her, I would not recommend that someone get out of their car and go to her rescue because that puts them in imminent danger as well. But I feel like the people that did stop and honk their horns and yell out the window and probably called 911, that they did help. So I think you have to, it's hard because you do want to go in and stop it and say and keep that person from getting hurt. But you have to always be aware of your safety as well. And you can't help someone
Right.
else if you're hurt.
Yes.
So that's the one with for the family or a friend. I think it's the thing about letting them tell you their story and then just listening and letting them know you're worried about them or you're afraid for them. Also, letting them know about resources. So, all of the National Domestic Violence Hotline, our website, in the texting, all of that is done in a way. There's always a little spot on the right hand side of the screen. So let's say they're on the screen looking at something to help them, and the abuser walks in the room. All they have to do is hit that icon, and it takes it off of that screen and it erases it from the browser. So they can't go in to see what they were looking at. So I think that's important to know that you can give them those kind of resources, and it's a little bit safer than some, like you can't give a brochure to a woman and
Yeah.
tell her to take that home because that could get her hurt,
Yeah.
but they could look something up on the internet. And like I said, when you get out of it, it erases it so that they don't know that that's what you were doing.
Yes.
Um,
Good
but
information.
So knowing about agencies like ours, and like I said, we're not the only domestic violence in Dallas County. I'm very happy to say that there's others as well. But looking those up and giving them those time of resources. Our outreach office is busy all the time, as are we at the shelter. But the thing is that a lot of women stay in abusive relationships because they don't know there are resources out there.
Mhm.
And so just calling and ask and letting someone know their story, let them know what their needs are, and just seeing is there something out there that could help. And I think that's true for family members as well, or if you have a friend. I'll never forget doing this presentation it was one of the Dallas community colleges. And it had been you always go into it knowing it's going to be college students, but they had also posted it in a way that just people in the community came to it.
Mhm.
And a woman came up to me afterwards and said, I wish I had known about you or, your agency or an agency like yours because my friend was murdered by her husband about 3 months ago because she didn't know there were resources out there. So
Yeah.
that's why this is really important to share. And thank you for the opportunity to share it with the public because people don't know.
Yes.
And so I think that just being here tonight and learning about it is a big step. So,
Yes, most definitely. And it's
yeah.
our pleasure, and we are so happy to have
Yeah.
you anytime, anytime.
Thank you.
And I saw one more question come through in the chat.
Okay, all
It
right.
said, what if that person doesn't want to leave?
And that's not unusual. That is not unusual at all. If they don't want to leave, still, we have to respect that. But it doesn't hurt to keep saying, I'm really worried about you. I'm afraid you're going to get seriously injured or killed, because that's what they need to hear.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we have to respect that's their decision. And we can't, as much as we would like to, we can't make it for them.
Yes.
So,
That's
I mean,
so good.
people come to our shelter. We're called an emergency shelter for someone who's in danger of being seriously injured or killed. But sometimes when they're here, then they make that decision to go back to home to the abuser. And so our goal then is to help them safety plan and to know, what to do should they get into a place where they know they need to leave.
Yes.
So,
Well,
yeah.
thank you so much.
You
And
are welcome.
yes, like I said, this has been so informative, as it is every time you come. Again, we're just so grateful for you taking the time out to share this important information. And I know our clients agree as well. We're getting lots of thank yous to come through the chat. So yes, thank you again.
You are welcome.
I also uploaded the website for you all, for people to go to as
Oh,
well.
good.
Contact information.
Yeah.
It's www.genesisshelter.org. So if you all want some more information, please feel free to visit that website. Okay.
And we do have we have a blog on the website, which addresses a lot of different topics. And then I know that we now have podcast. So I think you can get to the podcast through there as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much for coming and joining us, Ms. Christine. And
You are
thank
welcome.
you all the clients that came. We appreciate you. We know, like I said, this is a long day for you all, but you took time out of your day to join us, and we truly appreciate you all. And I wanted to let you all know that our next virtual class is going to be on next Tuesday, December the 14th at 6 p.m. Our partners, State Farm, they're going to be back and they're going to talk about insurance basics. So you all be sure to register for that. Remember, you get educational hours for every class that you attend. All right. And again, thank you all so much. And we're going to let you all have the rest of your evening. Enjoy. And if we don't see you all, happy holidays.
Yes. Same to everybody.
All right. Have a good evening, everyone.